Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist oppression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It's your local community radio station. My name is Andy and I'll be hanging out with you for the next hour, broadcasting on Jagera and Turrbal country as we do every week. Today on the show, we are going to be talking about an anniversary, a significant anniversary, but one that you will not see mentioned very much in our media this weekend. But Sunday marks 70 years since the first nuclear weapon was detonated on Australian land at Emu Fields near the sort of West Australian, South Australian Northern Territory borders. It was done by the British testing their own nuclear weapons, and it had very dramatic effects. Something went wrong, as tends to happen with nuclear weapons. It should be said, something goes wrong, and there was a thick black mist released from the nuclear weapon, and it poisoned many of the Aboriginal people living in the area, the Yankiata people, who bore the scars from that for the rest of their life and still do generationally, as we'll find out on today's show. I speak to Karina Lester. Her father, Yami Lester, was blinded. He was 9 years old when the nuclear bomb was detonated on his country. Obviously, he'd not been told beforehand, and he was blinded and spent the rest of his life struggling to get justice for the people affected by that bomb and the other nuclear weapons that were detonated at Emu Fields there, and then later at Maralinga. And then, of course, in South Australia, there's been a consistent need for Aboriginal people to fight against the nuclear industry on their country. And we will hear about that as well over the course of the show. Today we'll hear from Uncle Kevin Buzzacott, who is Arabunna elder. On his country is the world's biggest uranium mine, the Olympic Dam mine at Roxby Downs. And Uncle Kev has been resisting that mine for a long, long time now, over 3 decades. And we'll also hear from Aunty Dawn Taylor, who is a Barngarla elder, and the most recent fight for South Australian Aboriginal people against the nuclear industry was Barngarla people trying to stop a nuclear waste dump being built on their land. And a couple of months ago, they did win in court, stopping that nuclear waste dump from being built. And we'll hear from Aunty Dawn about that. Those last 2 interviews, Uncle Kev and Aunty Dawn, were recorded by the Radioactive Show on 3CR, excellent community radio station in Melbourne. The Radioactive Show for a long, long time has been sharing the stories of Aboriginal people and everybody else who is trying to stop the long-term contamination that comes from the nuclear cycle. And it's hard to get onto some of these folks out in the desert, and so I was glad to be able to reuse a bit of material from the Radioactive Show. So anyway, that is what's coming up. I better get straight into it because it's got a lot of content and it is quite powerful. It's, I think, stories of, I guess, the nuclear industry and particularly nuclear weapons just really bring in big existential questions about what do we want our life to look like on this planet as a human species, and as, you know, a nation that produces a lot of uranium that is exported around the world, and potentially, you know, Australia is still talking about small modular nuclear reactors is the latest thing that the mining industry is trying to push onto the Australian public through their lackeys in government. But also, of course, nuclear submarines now we're talking about, having floating nuclear reactors, so we can fight American wars in our region, basically. And the effects of the nuclear weapons and the nuclear industry are huge in the short term. They can be totally catastrophic, but also they last a long, long time, much longer than any of us will ever live, or probably our civilization will ever live. Our legacy will be this toxic waste and toxic radioactive particles, and so it really does bring up big questions. And the story we'll hear from Karina Lester now about her Aboriginal nation and her family is quite a moving story as well. So let's hear from Karina.
My name's Karina Lester. I'm a Yankunytjatjara woman who lives up on the Yankunytjatjara lands, but I also work for a small team called the Mobile Language Team at the University of Adelaide, and we work on Aboriginal languages in the state of South Australia.
And today I'm talking to you because it's a significant anniversary for Yankunytjatjara people. It is 70 years this weekend since the first nuclear weapon was detonated in Australia, on your father's country. I guess, can you tell us a bit about that story and why it's a significant anniversary?
Yeah, well, come the 15th of October 2023, it'll mark the 70th anniversary. It's not really an anniversary. I think it's really, you know, I always relate to anniversaries as celebrations, but this one is a bit of a sad story, Andy, in that, you know, the British government and the Australian government decided to run a nuclear testing program on the soil of Australia's soil, in the state of South Australia, and Emu was the first mainland test. So there were 2 atom bombs detonated there. The first one, of course, being the 15th of October, and that was Totem 1. And then the second was detonated on the 27th of October 1953. So 70 years ago this month, there were 2 mainland tests that were conducted on Australian soil. So, you know, I think the 70th is really just to, again, remind fellow Australians out there of what our past involved and what happened, and to really, most importantly, for my family and my late father, Yami Lester, to keep his story alive, because he really was instrumental in bringing that awareness to the community and involved in the Royal Commission into the British testing, and that Royal Commission took place in the early 1980s, and it really exposed the story of what happened in our state of South Australia, because after Emu Fields, they continued down to Maralingudjarrudja, where the program continued on down there as well. So our state of South Australia wears a lot of scars of nuclear bomb tests.
Yeah, and your family in particular was very affected. Your father, Yami, was a young boy at the time, and his life was forever affected by the bomb, wasn't it?
Absolutely. You know, it was early that morning on that day when Dad felt the ground shake. People were here living in this community, and I'm actually coming from the very location too, Andy. I'm up at Wallatina, at Walyajara, on the Arabunna lands, and it was this very location when, you know, the ground shook and this black mist rolled over the main camp, and people's lives changed dramatically. You know, the older generation who felt the fallout and saw this black mist were really impacted. Many of them became really sick, and many passed older generation, and then, Dad's mothers and her sisters had skin rashes and sore eyes, and, with Dad's story, he became very ill and also lost his sight from those tests, but it was a slow, gradual process, and 4 years after, he became completely blind, and and his world changed dramatically. His world went into darkness, and it wasn't from his actions, it was from actions of governments of the day who decided to test no consideration for First Nations peoples, for Arnonga, let alone civilians who were working perhaps in the nearby pastoral leases, There's families that have been exposed to this, and those stories need to be told.
For the Yankunytjatjara people, it would have been a great shock. They would have had no concept of what this thing was that had happened. What was the communication like from the government at the time, or was there any follow-up afterwards?
Look, Andy, no communication, none whatsoever. One patrol officer, Mr. McDougall, who had a huge job of driving around almost a third, maybe even half the state of South Australia to inform people he could communicate to, because he wasn't a Yankunytjatjara speaker, let alone a Binyatjara speaker as well. He was an English person who, spoke with the pastoralists, and Dad and his people were here at Wallatinna working for Mr. and Mrs. Cullinan at the time. So Mr. McDougall did speak with the pastoralists, Mr. Cullinan and Mrs. Cullinan, but no communication to Arnonga, because our language is Yankunytjatjara. So Arnonga had no concept and no idea of what was about to occur early that morning. And, as perhaps a date was exchanged with Mr. Cullinan and Mr. McDougall, and they may have been aware, but that morning really came as a shock, and then great fear within that community, and within my own people panicked. People didn't know what this black mist was as it approached silently through the bushes. And we live outside. None of mob were living. My grandfathers were living out on country, in the open country. They know about dust storms and wind and what comes with dust storms, but this black sooty smoke just rolled silently and left a trail of smelly, like soot, on the leaves of the trees, on country, and on people. And people became very violently ill, and like I said, many passed, and our worlds changed dramatically. So, there was no communication of what was about to happen and what was going to occur as in the aftermath. Then, people really started to suffer, and country became quite sick as well.
Did the Yankunytjatjara people stay there on country in that area that was affected by the black mist, or did people leave?
People did stay around working, because it was at that time, Andy, people were working in this pastoral industry that we have here in South Australia, and many of my dad's people were working for the surrounding pastoralists, and so people did start to become sick, and of course people did move on, especially those who were closely related to the elderly that had passed. They had moved perhaps up to Granite Downs, so further sort of northeast from Walyajatta, and some moved further east towards Oodnadatta area. But that fallout did move in that direction. It fell over north from, because Wallerton is north from the test site, it fell north in a northeasterly direction. The black mist rolled and fell over our country. So people moved, but as people sort of moved away from Wallerton, they moved in the direction of where, the cloud had sort of fallen over. So again, trying to look for work, but also trying to, get assistance and help that they needed, because the railway line at Oodnadatta was operating at the time. And so people moved easterly, and within my own family story, Dad on many occasions was put onto that train, onto the GAN, and travelled down to Port Augusta for his medical appointments, because that was the only real transport route available for us up this way at the time. So, people did move eventually, but again, it was also their traditional lands too, Andy, so they have this spiritual and cultural connect that we are a part of this country. We're Yankunytjatjara people connected to the Yankunytjatjara stories that are recorded all through our country, and people always came home. And I'm a classic example. I'm back home on country, and people had to move, but people also came home.
Your father, I guess he was very affected, as he said. He went blind as a young man, but the rest of his life was really spent putting a lot of effort into talking about this and educating people about the nuclear industry. Can you tell us a bit about the rest of your father's life?
For his youngest daughter, Dad was always Dad to me, but of course he went on and achieved many amazing things over his lifetime, at that time. And I always sort of reflect around the time of that Royal Commission, just before the nuclear Royal Commission into the British nuclear tests, probably a year or two, we had received our traditional lands, the Yankunytjatjara lands, back in 1981. So he had achieved that with his people. He then pushed for the Royal Commission into the British nuclear tests. And in 1985, he worked tirelessly for the handback of Uluru, Karajura National Park, and went on and achieved that as well with his people. And I look back, and it's in particular that period of time, like I was only young, but Dad was incredibly busy and Mum was incredibly busy looking after the children. There's 3 children, and that time in the early 1980s, Dad had achieved so many amazing and wonderful things. And even with his disability, but he had amazing people around him, good family, friends, and people wanting to help Arnongo and help him. And so he continued to do all these wonderful, amazing and, national historical achievements, land rights, handback, royal commissions. And as a young daughter, I saw that as Dad's work, but as an older woman now with 4 children of my own, I look back and think Dad made history.
Yeah, that's right. An amazing life legacy, You mentioned before South Australia and the scars it carries, and of course it didn't end with Maralinga because there's been the Olympic Dam uranium mine built there, of course the biggest uranium mine in the world, and there's been a consistent push for a nuclear waste dump to be built in South Australia. But Aboriginal people in South Australia have been resisting this a lot, haven't they?
Absolutely, Andy. And it's like we don't have a life. Our life is constantly fighting for justice. And this is all about, the past and things that have gone terribly wrong for First Nations peoples. And South Australia continues to struggle in this space. And First Nations, Arnungu and Gugada and Andigirinya and Maduyangunyara mob, we are Barngarla mob, we are constantly pressured by governments of the day to be the solution of something that they have no knowledge of how to manage. My journey, my personal journey, Andy, has moved into that space of campaigning against waste dumps because my nana was heavily involved in the first waste dump proposal in South Australia, and she was a big part of the Gubabidi Gungayuda, and they made history again by putting legislation in our government, in our state government, to prohibit anything nuclear in our state of South Australia. And it was a 7-year campaign of just constantly talking up. And one thing I learnt from that campaign, the Yaradiwandi campaign, was that Nana Mob were not only worried about us as the next generation, but they were worried about the truck driver who was going to be transporting that nuclear waste to our state of South Australia coming from New South Wales. And, it really wasn't just an Arnungal issue, a black issue, it was Australia's issue. And they campaigned hard, and we did that. And Nana was successful. And as I said, she put in legislation. So, my story came involved in that campaign work. I worked very closely with Nana again, working as an Arnungal interpreter, again, to get her story out. And, all my grandmothers and aunties who were heavily involved in that campaign, it was really important for us to get their words out in their language, and for my role to interpret their words as well. And they were very strong, culturally, important law women who had cultural responsibilities. And that's where I kind of started my personal journey as well, knowing Dad's story and knowing how that had impacted, the nuclear testing program had impacted on Dad, but also moving into campaigning against waste dumps and, again, royal commissions in the 2015, 2016 and 17. We were actually trying to campaign against a royal commission into the nuclear fuel cycle. So, it's been a tireless and long generational story for us here in South Australia and my family in particular too.
Yeah, and it's still going, of course. The most recent one, it was the court victory this year by Barngarla people at Kimba against the waste dump there. But this year, it's been in the news a lot. The Liberal Party's consistently talking up nuclear power, and of course we've got potentially nuclear submarines coming into this country. I guess, what are your thoughts on this, the fact that it never seems to go away and it just keeps coming back, these conversations?
Yeah, it's an ongoing struggle. It really is. And, like I said, it's as if we don't have lives ourselves. We have children. We have our own family, our own jobs, our own lives to live, and then governments of the day decide to, run a royal commission into the nuclear fuel cycle, or, pressure us for our traditional lands to be the waste dump of, the state and the nation, or perhaps international waste dump of the world. So, it's an ongoing struggle, and, there are so many injustices being done on First Nations peoples, and it is exhausting and it is generational, and people need to know this. Fellow Australians need to know this, on how it's impacting on First Nations peoples.
Well, Karina, has been a real struggle for your family, but you certainly have done a lot of incredible work yourself and your father and your nana, as you said, and for everybody, for future generations, potentially tens of thousands of years into the future. And so I really want to thank you very much for all the work that yourself and your family have put in.
Thank you, Andy. I'm really grateful for doing this interview with you. I want to bring this attention to my fellow Australians and let them know of our story and our truth-telling of what happened to our Arabunna, Binyara Yangunyara mob, because of, governments making a decision that had a huge impact, a generational impact on First Nations peoples of the state of South Australia. And so, this is not over. No doubt the waste dump issue will be raised again, and we Australians need to fight this.
All right. Thanks very much, Karina.
You're welcome. Thanks, Andy. I really appreciate it.
That was Karina Lester. Her father, Yami Lester, was blinded by the first atom bomb dropped in Australia at Emu Fields 70 years ago this Sunday. And Karina and her family have been resisting the nuclear industry ever since. As you heard, not just seeking justice for the Aboriginal people affected by the bombings at Emu Fields and Maralinga, but also being part of a struggle against the first proposed nuclear waste dump in South Australia on Kukata country, which the Kukata people and also a group of women who are called the Gubapidi Kungajuda, which I think means a group of Pedi old women who got together to oppose that and were successful. It's part of a long, long struggle that South Australian Aboriginal people have had against the nuclear industry, which considers all that land its own to use for whatever it wants, dropping nuclear weapons, digging up uranium, building nuclear waste dumps. And Aboriginal people have consistently, over the last 70 years, had to push back against the nuclear industry, treating that country as if it can do whatever it wants, it can poison it. And one of them is Uncle Kevin Buzzacott, who is a Arabunna elder. On his country is the world's biggest uranium mine, the Olympic Dam mine at Roxby Downs. I've got a little recording here of Uncle Kev that was made by the radioactive show on 3CR. You will occasionally hear M Crunch from that show interjecting, but mostly it's just Uncle Kevin talking about his life resisting the nuclear industry on his country.
Anyhow, I'm Kevin Buzzacott, Arabunna elder and peacemaker, combating this horrible industry, which is uranium. We want to shut down the Olympic Dam, and also in South Australia we've got the big waste threat. Waste is a horrible thing, and we've told a lot of these people way back, even some of the old elders that I knew before, were told the industry and the government and the mining companies do not to develop uranium, leave it where it is. And so now they've got all this waste. They want to put it on some beautiful country and destroy that environment, and also they've got to stop conning and tricking people. I think people like us that's been out there and, Friends of the Earth, the Rat Tours and all our mob there, having gatherings and stuff up there and talking to them, I think we kept them honest. If it hadn't been for us out there singing out against this horrible industry, they'd probably just go ahead, boots and all, they'd dig the country up, rip it up, kill it and poison people. That's the other thing that's surfacing now. I've been at it for some time, and it's only this last couple of years we've just lost a lot of people. Since the birth of development of the Olympic Dam We have lost a lot of people, young and old, from sicknesses that unheard of. It was never in that area before. Other than, way back the Maryland bombs, pest and Woomera rocket range stuff. But we couldn't record stuff them days and how many people died and all that, and how many people got sick from that area. But I tell you what, with the development of Olympic Dam, it's just slaughtered us. We're just dying left, right and centre. And like I said, with all these sicknesses, heart attack, cancer, dialysis, all these sicknesses that's unheard of in my time. And it only happened since the development of these horrible places. And the thing is with us is that we have to look after the country, and if we don't look after the country, well, it comes back and bites you. And that's what I've been telling some of these bad guys as well. Don't get caught up in it, don't get conned, don't get tricked. Don't worry about the bloody money, because the money will kill you. That's about what's happening with people. Because for us to survive, we must have a good land, we must look after our land and look after it ourselves. And at the moment, we're not actually doing that. We're just suffering from the bad decision made by the government and the people, you know. They'll argue that these places have got to be there for so it creates jobs for people, but what was happening before the mines started, you know? People were working and happy where they was. You know, got to get a good clean job, not a bloodbath money job, sell your soul, you know. It's not only just our argument, this is everybody's argument, because uranium by now, everybody should know what happens to it when it goes through its process and it ends up being a gun or make a bomb out of it, and the wars are killing people, killing millions and millions of people. And this is where we've got to stop this and make the world a better place, a purer place. And we've got so much repairs to do with the land as well as our own minds and bodies, and there's so many sick people out there. If we don't start doing it now, I think we're going to might be too late. It's pretty well too far gone already, so to speak. But I believe that we can stop it and we can be better people for it at the end of the day.
Is that what's kept you going all these years? I guess it's been more than 30 years fighting Olympic Dam and more broadly the nuclear industry. What's kept you going through all those years?
You know what, funny you asked me that when I only thought about all that this morning. I think about it a lot actually, but this morning I was really into that, thinking about why am I doing this, you know, I'm pushing 70 or something now, and I asked myself, why am I still out there doing it? Well, it's like I have to do it because my main existence, that's why I exist, if I could say that word, that is to care for the land and love the land. And I tell you what, I really love that old desert. And even the old lake and all the mountain springs that this Olympic Dam has taken over from our area. It's a purpose in life that just saving the environment, that you, me and our kids and our future, it depends on. So, you know, everybody, we want a good clean environment. We don't want to poison place. We want it all fresh for ourselves, the sick ones and the little ones. So, get on board. You're missing out, you miss out otherwise.
We were hearing from Kevin Buzzacott, Arabunna elder, talking about his history of fighting against the BHP's uranium mine at Roxby Downs, which is on his Arabunna country. The most recent struggle that Aboriginal people in this country have had against the nuclear industry was the Barngarla people in South Australia trying to stop the latest iteration of the nuclear waste dump that has taken different forms over the years. At one point it was proposed that an international nuclear waste dump would be built in Australia. This one was supposed to be just low-level intermediate waste, but of course since then there's been the announcement of AUKUS and the fact that Australia will have nuclear-powered submarines potentially generating high-level nuclear waste, and where did they think that was going to go? And so the Barngarla people resisted the waste dump being built at Kimba, and they were successful in the end. They had a victory in court where they said that there'd been no proper process, that actually the Liberal government at the time, Keith Pitt, the Resources Minister, had just picked a place without doing any of the process they were supposed to do. And so it was thrown out in court, and the Labor government said that they won't keep pursuing a nuclear waste dump there. Just after that announcement by the Labor government, Radioactive Show on 3CR spoke to Aunty Dawn Taylor, who is a Barngarla elder. They started off by asking her how she was feeling.
I am just really glad to get over the line. It's like the old saying is, don't mess with Barngarla.
Yeah, you put up an amazing challenge over the last 6 years, is it now, that you've been fighting against this?
For the last 6 years, yes, we have. Well, give and take. Probably about 7 years, I reckon.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I've been fighting for about the last 3 years, but it's like I've told everybody, being born in Kimba and raised in Kimba, and, we're the ones that site was where we used to go out all the time. We used to walk for miles around Kimba. And I've told everybody, that is, right, it is a sacred site, because grandparents and everybody used to go through there. They walked from Woodner to settle in Kimba. I am really, I got really emotional with the court hearing, and I've also got a bit emotional when I heard Madeline King was pulling the plug on it, put it that way. I'm still reeling about the verdict, but I'm also a bit concerned about where they want to go next. Our Barngarla people are happy that we're not going to have poison on our land. It means a lot to us because the reason is because we, it's Barngarla land, and the Barngarla people want our country to stay like that. It's like I've always said, and I'll keep on saying, it's not about the money, it's about the country and how beautiful it is. Even the farmers will tell you that.
You did say that you're worried about where it might go now, and I think that's something that, everyone in the anti-nuclear movement as well holds that concern about. Will another remote dump site on sacred land or a different Aboriginal country be selected, or what will the next steps be? Did you have any thoughts to share about what future proposals there might be, or even that kind of solidarity for other people who may have to oppose poison going onto their lands?
Well, a lot of people told us that, being Barngarla, that we wouldn't be able to, win against the government. The Barngarla people proved it wrong. We fought against the government and we won our case. There's no dump on that case, on that land. So, if you put it one way, we fought the government, the Barngarla people fought the government and the Barngarla people won. So to everybody else, if it goes on their land, each traditional group, tribal group that's around, fight the government. Don't stand back. Don't shut up. Just keep fighting them until you get get what you really want is for no poison on your land.
Yeah, it's really inspiring and is part of a long history of resistance, particularly in what's now known as South Australia. And when the Napindi site was first announced, did you know much about the previous struggles or about the issue of nuclear waste?
Well, we had heard that they had planned on putting it up in the Flinders Ranges, and we heard that they had won the case up there with no waste dump being put in the Flinders Ranges. My thoughts were we would never, there were 3 sites that come up, but Napindi apparently they just picked it out of a box, and Napindi was the next one on the list. When I first heard about it and how close it is to Kimba, my stress levels just grew so much that I had to fight because of my grandparents, my ancestors, and that would have wanted me to go this far and not get it on our land.
Amazing. Such a strong legacy that you're carrying, and as we can see from this recent win and protection of country, your efforts to keep up the fight have really contributed to saving the significant sites, and hopefully you and Barngarla people can now, not have to be defending against something so negative and actually look to really positive ways of having that native title and some more security over your land.
Well, I can't think on the positive side at the moment. I think positive because we won. But until they leave that land, until everything is gone off that land and they've restored it, then I'll be able to, my stress levels will come down. But until then, I don't think I'll be able to relax until I know they've actually gone from Kimba.
Yeah, that's it. Tell us a bit about the work that has been undertaken at the site, and if you know anything about how any...
Well, the government has let them go ahead and done characterisation work. It's been a long haul, but we've done it. We've stopped all that there through the minister. The minister, we had a meeting with the minister in Kimba, and they went ahead and done work behind our backs. But everything is, they had to stop it straight away because we was going through the court proceedings, and when we found out that we won that case, everything had to stop. And now, because yesterday when we were there, we had to hear that, we heard that she wasn't going to appeal, was even a better outcome, because we know that work has got to stop. And everything on that land that they've done, they drilling and doing sampling and things like that there, that's got to all be revegetated.
During this time that you've been fighting against the nuclear waste dump, the federal government announced the AUKUS pact with the nuclear submarines. That will mean there will be very high-level, long-lived waste. Did that impact how you felt?
That had a big impact, because when they announced that there about the high-level waste dump, that was the first thought I had in my mind about Kimba. Even though they said it was low level and medium level radioactive waste dump, the first thing I thought about was a high level, and how it can, you can have a spillage somewhere, you can have an accident somewhere, and destroy the land altogether. What's going to happen then? My point is, if you know that country that means a lot to you, stand up, speak up, and don't shut up. Let them hear what you have to say about that land.
Strong words. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
That is Aunty Dawn Taylor, their Barngarla elder, talking about their successful fight to stop nuclear waste dump being built at Kimba, and it will be an ongoing issue. Of course, Lucas Heights nuclear reactor does generate nuclear waste, And so we do have to store it somewhere, and we have to be very careful. We have to very carefully think about how we're going to store it, because we're dealing with something that will last a long, long time. As I said, it will long outlast our own lives, and our responsibility to future generations is to not leave this super hazardous material around where it will forever be a danger. And so we do need to work out something, but of course at the moment, with the continual lobbying of not just the nuclear mining and power industry, which are big corporations who definitely have the ear of some politicians, like National Party politicians like Keith Pitt, as well as the pressure now of nuclear-powered submarines and potentially more nuclear weapons being made. Now in a situation, global conflict between nuclear powers. We shouldn't be trying to build things that can encourage the growth of this thing. If we're against it, the further proliferation of nuclear weapons and nuclear power, then we should be trying to resist things that will make it easier for it to grow. And Aboriginal people, as all of the ones we've heard from today, Karina Lester, Aunty Dawn and Uncle Kevin, they've all said, that we have a responsibility to our country to look after it, and that's been the great motivating thing for them to fight against people who see this land as only a quarry to be excavated or vacant space to have nuclear weapons dropped on it. And so the struggle will go on to protect our country from those who don't care for it. And it's worth remembering things like this, that 70 years ago this weekend, a nuclear weapon was dropped on Aboriginal people, essentially, the fallout, without bothering to tell them first or going to check on them afterwards or anything like that. And that is the history of this country. And we don't want it to be the future. And so in lots of ways, we should be trying to make our country and our world better, more just, more caring. That's about all we have time for on The Paradigm Shift. See you next week.